Welcome to day 15 of this Living Well series. This is the last day, and it's been such a rewarding experiment here. I did not ever do any live streams before, and you guys asked, and I stood up to the challenge and responded. And it's been a really fruitful experience. As some of you know, I was supposed to be in Japan right now teaching at a retreat. And instead, we are here. The universe said, there's something bigger and better for you to do. And so clearly, this has been very, very effective for those of you who've been there from the beginning. If it's brand new, something you've just joined, very welcome. This is a practice. This is something which I call it's a love affair. So it's a love affair with the self that we learn and we adopt and we thrive in the midst of these very unusual, but it's a blessing circumstance that we're in. That if you notice, what has actually happened is this coronavirus lockdown, social isolation has actually brought us closer. I mean, I have neighbors here. I have friends, family members that I have not connected in a long time, or at least spent this much time in a long time with. And I truly feel very close to so many of you with this daily interaction. And then yesterday I called mom. So you heard my story about, my dad, the spirit, and, this thing. And she was like, why did you never mention it to me? So it's like I'm opening up my heart here in ways that I did not expect. And it just feels so natural. I feel like you guys are like my family. I mean, I don't know if you feel it that way. So if you do, go ahead, please type it in. If you don't, tell me that too. And if you feel like there's certain distance between you and me, and I'm the only one speaking, and for your voice is not because for whatever reason, I'd love to hear how you're feeling. So y'all are saying definitely yes. Brother from another mother. I love that. Okay. Yeah, my Irmao, that's beautiful. Thank you. So I promised you, if you remember, a few days ago that I'm going to share a story with you. And I didn't have the time that day, and I did not forget. So here we go. So this is a story when I was in my junior year in engineering college. And I used to sail a lot. I still sail, but I don't sail as much as I used to. And there was this particular race, which I had never ventured into anything like that before. It was an offshore sailing regatta. It's a sailing rally from Bombay to Goa, a 300 nautical mile course. And I decided to jump into it because, it was just sounded so cool. It was like the next frontier of my sailing skills. But mind you, I am a day sailor. So I had no experience in navigation, no experience in sleeping on the boat, staying on the boat for days together. It's a 7-day course. So what I did was I reached out to my uncle, who I don't know if he's probably listening to this thing to hear, but he's a master mariner. So this is like one of the highest certifications you can get for seaworthiness, navigation, and so on. He used to be a captain for big ocean-going tankers. And so probably the only wise thing I did in that whole trip is to invite him to be my navigator, and he miraculously agreed. And then I had 2 other people, crew members. So we were a crew of 4, set out from Mumbai Bay and off into the ocean. And we were sailing down to Goa, and we hit massive storms, and some boats actually didn't make it. Some people had to basically be rescued and so on. So we miraculously somehow got through all of that with putting all of our skills together. But I want to share this particular episode on the last day. And so the way it works is when you come into port in Goa, the finish point for the race was upstream inside a river, right? So you come in from the ocean and you sail upstream, and then there's a finishing point. There's a yacht club there. Now, the tide turns, as you know, every 12 hours. And if we didn't make it into port, into the river upstream, we would be pushed backwards, right? Why? Because the wind dies, as you know, again, every so often, there 12 hours, we have something called the sea breeze and the land breeze. And when that switch happens, and if that is timed with the switch of the tide, you're really doomed because there's no wind for you to propel yourself, and you're getting pushed by the tide the opposite direction. I knew that, but then sometimes things don't work out the way you want out at sea. So we didn't make it on time. It started getting dark. we were sitting there, literally this boat is called a seabird, so like a sitting duck, floating and actually floating backwards. And then as it was getting dark, what happened is there's Goa port has got a lot of ore mining, right? So they have these barges that pick up ore from one place and then they bring it in, go back and forth, in and out. So now the shape of a barge is something quite different from a ship. A ship is typically, it's big, but it's also tall, right? But a barge is very low and flat. It's very long. And then the captain and the crew sit way back at the end of the barge. So this barge that was coming out into the ocean and we were coming in, and we were really not coming in, we were just sitting there. They didn't see us. And so then my uncle said, flash the light on the sail because that's your biggest canopy, that's the biggest surface area. So we were trying to blow horns, nothing. I mean, the barge was so noisy, it didn't hear anything. So it was started coming at us. We did everything we possibly can. We was just like I said, we were helpless. We didn't have any propulsion, and the barge was not changing course. It was not responding to any of our signals. So I thought that's it. I thought, I was like, at one point I closed my eyes and I said, this is it. This is going to be a way I'm going to die. I'm going to die at sea and just wish that my family knows that I love them. And they said my final prayers. And lo and behold, when I opened my eyes, I was still alive. And what was really interesting is my uncle, who was on the boat, kept cool. And then in hindsight, I asked him the question. I said, what happened? How did you, not panic like I was? And he told me that he's, with his experience out at sea, there's something called the bow wake. When these boats, these big ships have this, the wake that comes out of the bow. He says, we were going to be pushed aside because we were just sitting there. We were not being propelled. So we knew we would be fine. We just, we did everything we could, and that's all we could hope for. And sure enough, we survived that. Now, as I mentioned to you in one of the questions that came up earlier in the series about confronting death, and that day was that moment where I saw death up front and center. And really, that was the day I felt I had transitioned from being a boy to a man. So it was like a rites of passage for me, because that's what it is. Rites of passage is really pushing yourself to a limit in the company of somebody that you're safe, but also you're being challenged. You're being threatened with your existence. You're questioning everything that you ever knew. And that's when you survive a process like that, you realize the humility of our existence in compared to all of those things, the wisdom, the forces, Mother Nature, existence itself, that is so much bigger, and we're just a part of it. So with that story, I'd like for you to dive into the practice today. And today, I want to start off with a somatic exercise. I'm going to move my chair back a little bit. So I want you to keep your arms together, and then let's do this thing called the swan dive. So where you take your arms, take it up to the top, and as you are exhaling, you come down. So as you go up, take your arms up. I hope you're able to see me. And as you exhale, you come down. Let's do this a couple more times. Inhale as you're going up, and exhale as you're coming down. Inhale as you're going up, and exhale as you're coming down. Find your seat, literally or figuratively. You could be standing, you could be doing a headstand right now, it doesn't matter. Settle in, and let's dive into our heart space. This is a practice of using meditation to recenter yourself at times when you feel powerless. Rather than struggling with your thoughts, embrace them investigate, and find out more. Take in some deep, comfortable breaths. And notice that if you're able to breathe right now without a ventilator, there's much to be grateful for. Notice breath is happening on its own. You don't need to force anything. And if you're breathing right now, there's more right with you than wrong. So let's pour our attention and our energy into what is going right. Breath is a vehicle to turn your attention from the world outside into your heart space. Don't just stand at the door of your heart, but let's go in. There is a signal that tells you how wise or unwise you are in your way of meeting what may happen. If you react emotionally to any external situation, person, or event, it is a sign that you're trying to control what you can never control. Any reaction usually means there is some resistance and therefore an absence of acceptance, and therefore a wish to control. All events are usually in the past or, and more often than not, involve other people. And the two things in life that cannot be controlled or changed are the past and other people. This is probably why almost any reaction in life, other than dodging a tiger in the jungle, is a waste of time and energy. We seem to know this when we remember how much more effective it is to measure and create a positive response than it is to emotionally react. Moving away from reaction to response has to be something you can practice almost every day, almost everywhere. The truth is, you cannot control anyone or anything at any time. Nor any object more than 3 feet away from you. So why even bother? Why the habit of resistant reaction? It's just learned and can therefore be unlearned if you so desire. Practice this, transforming reaction to response. Visualize a scene where you reacted and see how you would offer a measured response instead. With such checking and changing, there will be no more struggle. Notice how you feel right now. Now see yourself walking down the path of life and bless your future self with the power of acceptance and lightness. See your future as if it was a path in front of you that lights up with your blessing. Ask yourself this question. If you knew that this was your last day or year, who would you spend time with? And what would be important to say, to do, or be? If this was your last day or year, who would you spend time with? And what would you say or do or be? Just when you feel comfortable and when you're ready, gently come back into the circle. And I invite you to share what came up in the inquiry. Who would you be with, and what would you say, do, or be? Go ahead and put that into the chat window, and Also, as I begin to read the responses, you could formulate your questions, and there's a separate window for Q&A that you can click and type in, and I will take them as they come. So let's see, I'm already getting some responses. Spend each moment with my two little kids and be present in each moment. I would let go of the awareness of last day and go about business as usual. That's interesting. Right. And Melissa says, I be with my granddaughter. I teach her about God within her. Beautiful. Werner says, last day, the closest family, wife and daughter. Okay, nice. Okay. Luz Elena says, I'll be with my only son. We'll tell him that I had a great life and he is the fruit of it. So we'll ask to celebrate together. Fantastic. Swati says, I would ensure my children have the skills they need to live after I am gone, which I guess that's a good practice every day. Don't wait for the last day. Saxony says, I would be with my family and friends on the beach dancing like there's no tomorrow. That's great. Maya says, I would spend my last day with my parents. I would say thank you. I love you many times. And it would be a day like this one. Oh, fantastic. Ranjani says, I will be with myself, chant the name of God. That's nice. Joe says, be with my children and grandchildren and tell them I love them. Professor Redana says, life partner and give all the support to move on. Margarita says, spend my time with my kids, my grandson, my sister, my friends. I would say how much I love them. Great. Okay, so I'm getting lots of responses now. They're beginning to flood in. So I'm just going to switch over to the Q&A section and see there's some questions there. So, folks, the first question is from Werner. So about yesterday, I was thinking how short life is. So we need to live every day. I didn't understand the connection between the bright star and reincarnation. Good question. Well, so now we're going back to some of the basics of spiritual practice. And interestingly, this is the basics of spiritual practice, but not many people actually practice it. And so what I'm about to tell you, they experience it vividly when they leave their body. So when you've heard of stories of people recall their near-death experiences, NDEs. So these are people who, for whatever reason, through electric shock or drowning or accident or bullet shot wound, they are clinically declared dead, and then somehow they come back to life. They wake up from from the morgue or from the surgery bed or what have you, and they come back and they live a life. And then so some of these people are able to very vividly describe what happens between that moment when they were declared dead by the doctors and the time that they got up and started moving and walking. And so one of the things that is very interesting, that I've actually studied this for a little bit to understand my own spiritual journey and make sure that it's not some hallucination in my own imagination that I'm experiencing, but there is some verification. Being an engineer, we need proof, we need validation. And the funny thing is, spirituality is metaphysical, right? So it's metaphysical, is outside the realm of physics, and there's really you can't prove things like you could do in the physical realm with weights and distances and measures and so on. But one of the things that I have been able to hack through this, my own curious mind, is by looking at the lives of these people who've been through near-death experiences. And what they say is that when they leave their body, very interestingly, they feel that sense of lightness, which we practiced yesterday in the death meditation. They don't feel any pain. They don't feel any turmoil. They're actually quite relieved. They feel very free. They feel their mind is expanded. And then what they see is they see their body down below. Many of times they see that thing and they say, oh my God, how the little, scrawny body, how did I ever fit into that thing? That's so limited. And the other aspect is that most of them talk about, they see this brilliant star, this brilliant being. And then the question that comes up for many of them is like, where did you come from? And then the being responds that I've always been here. It's just that you've been so caught up in your body consciousness that you never were able to access my presence. And they say that it's such a loving presence. It's such a loving thing. And I'm going to share with you a very quick real life story by a friend of mine, Dr. Jim Doty, who's right now a neurosurgeon at Stanford Medical Center here in California. He wrote a book, which some of you may have heard of, Into the Magic Shop. It's about the magic shop being the brain. It's about his life and his research, his study as a neurosurgeon. And I want to share with you one specific episode that he talks about. He says that he's in college and he was, being the typical pranksters and, mischievous youngsters. One day he and his friends drank a lot and they were driving, and under the intoxication, they veered off the road and they hit a tree head on. And he had a head injury in that accident. And then he was having an internal bleeding that he basically, was taken by the ambulance, but he had lost consciousness and he technically died. But then subsequently, he was taken into the critical care, and then they were able to revive him. And, and then after many hours or days, I can't remember exactly, he came back into consciousness and so on. But he shares this experience as a neurosurgeon, Western trained, as somebody who understands the brain science, very different from spirituality. He shares this episode where he says in that time when he lost consciousness that he felt like he was gliding over a river. And he was gliding over the river. On the banks of the river were all of the things and the people that he loved so much, like his dead dog, his dead mother, etc. And he says that as he was gliding over this river, he kept being, although there were all these lovely people and things that, that were precious to him, he kept moving forward. And he says the thing that was propelling him was that there was this beautiful, brilliant light that was towards the end of the river, and that was beckoning, that was inviting, that was pulling the soul. And so he kept, as he was even passing all of these things that he was attached to, that was more powerful than this. And then, he woke up and, kind of came back to reality. And that was a chapter that he still says he can't comprehend what exactly was that, but he says that he vividly remembers that. So hopefully that gives you a sense of that question you asked, what is the bright star, right? And what is our being? So we are all beings. We're all brilliant beings of light. Light is just a way of portraying energy, spiritual energy. How, the easy way to visualize it is by saying it as light, right? Now, just like we are beings of light, so is a supreme being. Supreme being is also light, but tends to be pure and unconditional and always available, benevolent, powerful, right? Doesn't ever lose its awareness of itself, and therefore it's that brilliant star, right? That is explained in different forms of meditation, different forms of yoga techniques around from different traditions. They talk about that Noor in Islam is called as the Noor, as the being of light. So therefore God in Islam, as you know, and in many other traditions, is not something that is physical with flesh and bones and a face and hair and male, female. It's outside of all of these physical constructs that we tend to like to bottle, like we try to see things that the way we see ourselves in the mirror. But that's just our representation of the divine being. Is in fact, that's also the representation of us. We're not really physical. We are spiritual beings. Okay, so going to the next question. Is marriage a hyped institution? So there is a beautiful answer that I got in a movie called PK. Guys, if you haven't watched it, I highly recommend it. It's a Bollywood movie. It's Bollywood, but I think it is really made for an international audience. The language is Hindi, but there's subtitles in it. And so there's this character, this guy who's a Martian or, basically an extraterrestrial creature that comes onto land, and somehow he gets stranded on land, sort of like E.T., but E.T. is this thing that looks very different. But in this particular case, it takes on the physical costume of a human being. and so then goes on to live life like a human being, but not really with a mindset. It's not conditioned, like your question being, hype of institutions, different kinds of institutions that we get into. He is not bought into it, and he wonders why many things. For example, one of the questions he really asks is religion. How come religion is something that is practiced so differently for the same God? We all do look in different directions, pray in certain ways, at certain times. We take a certain day of one day is Sabbath, one day is Sunday. It's a different holiday. So he questions it. Some of them, they use alcohol as a means of, they call it, God's blood, and some people abstain from alcohol. So he questions that. One of the things he questions in this movie is about this institution of marriage. So what exactly is marriage? Is that a formal way to institutionalize prostitution? Like, I mean, now you've bought into a contract. So it's very interesting to look at it from that outer worldly perspective. So yeah, so I mean, I'd leave it up to your own interpretation, but that's an interesting perspective, and something for us to reflect on. Anything. Marriage is one of those institutions, but our education system, our legal system. I'm reading. I actually went through most of the book by Yuval Noah Harari. It's one of the best books, I think, of our lifetime. So please, if you haven't read it, I highly encourage you. It's called Sapiens. It talks about basically the evolution of mankind, human beings. So Homo sapien, the thing, what you're seeing, who you are, and how this came through evolution as one of the mutations of this myriad of creatures on this planet, and how this one creature has got such a dominant role and has basically tried to take control. And until now, we've seen Mother Nature's pulling back the reins and saying, you know what, you're not in control, I'm in control. But we pretend as if we're in control. But how it has abolished, or it has annihilated all other mutations of species that came off of, they say that, we came from the monkeys, the apes, and then, the human being is basically an evolution of that. If that is the case, there were other variations of the evolutionary process from the ape. And how come this human Homo sapien destroyed all of that? And so in that, he also talks about a number of institutions that we've bought into. For example, one of them is about things about cities. He says city life is a farce. He says it's never a healthy situation. You're constricted. You have less access to fresh and free resources of the nature, and diseases spread, which is very evident as we speak. His concept is coming true, that this is very unhealthy for us. So that's one thing. And he talks about the other thing is about empires. He says a number of times empires, we bought into this idea of empires as a way of aggregating, societies. And as empires build, we are losing our individuality. As you can see, cultures are dwindling, languages are dwindling. These empires came from many, many centuries. And then he says, religion was another form of an empire. It was used as a means of a dominion, creating a dominion that they wanted to amass wealth and power and people and so on. And the other thing he talks about is the whole thing around agricultural revolution. He says that agricultural revolution has destroyed our health and has destroyed the planet from the natural resource perspective. And he's a big, by the way, proponent of a plant-based diet. And he says as much as possible, you should try to grow your own resources, or if you don't grow your own resources, be in a community where resources are grown, where you're not buying from, fruits from Chile and avocados from Mexico, and, your eggs are coming from, I don't know, Australia, and cheese is coming from New Zealand. He says that is simply not sustainable. And, so it's fantastic, this book. So Yuval Noah Harari is an Oxford graduate, professor at Oxford University. And then he now teaches at the University of Jerusalem. So please, highly recommend it. As clearly I've spoken so much about it, so it's worth you checking it out. So let's see, other questions. I'm looking through the comments. I see lots of comments. I feel I have been living the past few years after health issues, family, friends, and my gratitude to everyone who have been there for me. I think of what my father always said and his practice, that you always have the divine with you. In the end, if no one else is there, God is with you. So do your practice. Very good. Thank you, Veena. Prabhakar says, I would like to be with my wife. I want her to be love all and continue to do all noble deeds that she is doing now. Fantastic. Go body surfing in the ocean and be caressed by the elements. Loving myself and loving family, Maki says. My mom says, thank everyone who taught me lessons, helped me be a better person. Wonderful, Nalini. If it was my last day, I would spend time with myself, reflecting upon life, giving gratitude for everything and asking forgiveness, and tell myself I did my best. Very, very important. Literally, actually reflecting on, am I doing my best? And then going on to do my best. So fantastic. So with that, I'd like to remind you all, as I mentioned yesterday, that I've put together a course that is basically summarizing everything that I've done, I've talked about, I've shared with you all in the course of these last 15 days into a nice little handout. And that is available in this little link I've sent you here. I've put it in the chat window, and I ask Shivani to share it on the YouTube right now. And if you click on it, you'll see that you put in your email. So there's two purposes. One is that you have access to this 5 simple steps to be able to practice wellness during this COVID-19 shutdown, right? So those include social relationships, physical health, mental health, nature, and so on and so forth. And I want you to particularly please pay attention to the meditation, the guided meditation I shared with you there, because as I mentioned, I'm going to take a little break. So today is Wednesday here. We will restart these webinars on Monday, next Monday. But until then, I want you to continue to practice. And I have given you very clear step-by-step guidance as to how to be able to practice. And then what I would hope for is that you don't depend on me or anything else for you to be able to do your own practice. I want you to cultivate your own practice. So may you use this next 4, 5, 6 days, whatever's between now until we meet again, to create your own practice. And that's there in the booklet. And the second purpose of you going onto my website now and clicking and signing up and getting the download is that will be my way of communicating with you about the kickstarting this next set of webinars and future things that you might be able to participate in and you might enjoy my offerings. I have lots of things coming out in video format and audio format, live streaming, and of course, once this COVID-19 lockdown is lifted, I'll be doing lots of amazing in-person retreats where we'll be holding space together and so on. So all of that can be informed. You can be informed by that through this link that I've just sent it to you. So with that, folks, once again, a deep, deep bow of gratitude. Thank you for inviting me to create this beautiful circle. It's been a tremendously rewarding experience, and I cannot imagine how, with you just typing things and you sitting there on the other side of the screen. Actually, I have one of you, Margarita, reached out to me the other day and says, Jay, I don't feel like you're somewhere in another place and you're talking to me through the computer. It feels like you're right here in front of me, which is so fabulous. Isn't it incredible how this Zoom land has brought us together, and we're able to feel a deep sense of connection in the convenience and the comfort of, in the security of our living room. So also I would want to remind you, so we have responsibility to stay socially in our isolated, in our own quarantine, wash your hands daily. So there's a responsibility not just for yourself, but the people that you care for, but also there's plenty of people who are providing our basic services that as we take precautionary measures, those people who are putting their life on the line to keep the systems, the basic essentials, infrastructure running, they're able to stay safe as well. So thank you, folks. Until we meet again, namaste, be well, and keep the practice up and running.